Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Akira, or Akira, from 1988. And this is the winner of the Patreon movie review vote. If you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below for the Patreon, pledge to the Patreon, and maybe I will be reviewing your movie next month. I distinctly remember the first time I saw a part of Akira, and I had heard of Akira. It was kind of inescapable from comic book shops and sci-fi nerdery, which I was quite into at the time. And when it aired on TV, I had to record it. But of course, it aired on a weekday late at night, so I had to just record it and see if it actually recorded when I woke up the next day. And I remember the moment when I came down and watched the opening bike scene, and particularly the moment where I saw the guy fall off his bike and then have a bike run over his arm, and you heard the snap and his arm break. And I just went, whoa, what is this? And it just seemed unbelievable. And I think that's kind of why this film has become such a major part of how animation and anime really blew up in the 90s, and how anime really became a thing was because of the love of this movie, particularly on VHS, although this was released theatrically and did fine, sort of, for a movie that had no real precedent for its release. It still made about $400,000, which is pretty damn good, to be honest. It really started a whole generation, and I can say that because it really started my love of anime and getting you more into animation, taking animation more seriously as an adult. It made you take the medium more seriously because this was just a huge technical achievement. And it wasn't just that way in America. It was a huge achievement in Japan as well. Before that, you didn't have major productions like this in the Japanese animation industry. Most of the time, they were cheaper, lower cost, kind of the age of the OVA. And then Akira came along, which was a 1 billion yen or 10 million US dollars to make, which was much higher budget than they were used to show Katsuhiro Otomo's amazing, beautiful animated vision. And I think this film really just knocked everybody's socks off because no one had really seen anything like it. It was kind of indescribable. It was so good it was better than the kind of the movies that Disney were making in 1988, which was Oliver and Company, which I think in comparison, this really blows that out of the water. 1988 was a really great year for animation. You had The Land Before Time in America from Don Bluth. You also had, just a couple months before this was released, you had the double dose of Studio Ghibli masterpieces of Grave of the Fireflies and My Neighbor Totoro. It was a major year. It was a major turning point. It was certainly because I think it was the first year a foreign country had really not produced just one major classic, but three major animation classics that would live on probably more so than any of their American counterparts. And you know, Land Before Time's a cool movie, but that was maybe the best that 1988 had to offer in terms of feature-length animation, and Japan just like plopped out three amazing, undisputed classics of animation and filmmaking that you couldn't really argue with. It's hard to even deny the power of this movie. While watching it, I've seen this film a lot of times. I kind of fell in love with the streamlined voice dub, which, you know, is embarrassing now, I guess, to some people, but it was the one I really liked at the time. It's how most of us fell in love with Akira, so I think maybe we should give a little respect to it, but not, you know, a ton, because it wasn't amazing or anything. I watched it with the Japanese dub, which you probably should watch it with that, because they actually recorded the voice actors first and then animated it to what they did in the booth and to their mouth movements and their performances. So anyone who says it doesn't matter because it's all dubbed or whatever doesn't really understand the technical prowess and really why this film was such a huge technical leap forward and why it was such a huge achievement, because no one was really doing that sort of a thing, especially at the time. So the Japanese track is actually probably the most pure of the movie. It's not just like a simple dub or whatever. You know, there's probably other animes. It doesn't honestly really matter, but I think in Akira it definitely does. Although honestly, most of the time, if it's a foreign film, I try to watch it in its actual language. So, but I'm just saying, for argument's sake, this film just has such a power. It grabs me in such a way. When I started it, I've seen this film many times. I know how it flows, it goes. I know every scene to a certain degree. And while watching it this time, I was surprised at how much it grabbed me that I looked at the clock and realized most of the film had gone by, and I didn't think about it. I was just so wrapped up in it. And that really says a lot about the power of this movie. And what's interesting, I think, about this film is it's everyone's big first anime where they're like, holy shit, have you seen Akira? Like, even people who don't really like anime have seen Akira. But it's confusing, it's convoluted, it's crazy, but it is insanely watchable at the same time. I think a lot of that has to do with the Tetsuo Kaneda relationship. Frankly, they're the only two characters that anyone remembers other than, like, you know, Akira. The Tetsuo and Kaneda relationship is really what makes this movie. Even though there are way too many characters and people always claim that they're not fully developed and things like that. And I think ultimately, although I think the Tetsuo-Kaneda relationship is important to understanding this and important to your connection to this narrative and important to that working, it's very important, but it's also a great through line because you always know that relationship's there. You always know that's almost the important part of the movie somewhat, even though, you know, they nuke a city and stuff. Still, these two bros for life and a motorcycle gang are still the most important part of this movie for some reason. That's something you can understand, a relationship, and that's smart of Katsuhiro Otomo to have that be the centerpiece of it. And although he adapted this from, people keep saying however many pages or how long it is, manga or whatever, he found a way to kind of structure it in a way that worked for it. Because this does honestly feel like a comic book adaptation where they take a huge storyline and go, let's put it into 2 hours, that will work, right? Usually that does not work, and usually it shows a lot more. And I think in Akira, it sort of shows, but not in a negative way. There's a lot going on, but he manages to get that to work. Akira is probably one of those films where you watch it and go, you know, there's not a real way to tell a story, and I think many of people's problems with it is they're trying to put rules upon it that I don't think necessarily it needs those rules. If you had those rules, this would be a way worse movie. I don't need every character developed. I don't want a trilogy of Akira movies or anything like that. The reason this movie works is ultimately the whole experience of it, is the beautiful animation, is the way the story goes through, is the Kaneda and Tetsuo relationship, is everything within it, is the music, is the direction, is just the animation, the action sequences, all of that together. The experience of Akira is why it works. Acting like this film is just merely story or just merely animation, you're missing the point. It's the experience of all of it that makes Akira what it is. Akira would never be able to be replicated because that's what's so special about it, is like, how the fuck did this happen? And it felt like that when you're watching in America, and it probably felt like that in Japan because this was not what anime looked like at the time, and suddenly you're like, holy fucking shit. And the craziest thing is the animation still stands as some of the best animation ever, probably up there with like Walt Disney's Pinocchio and things. Some of the best hand-drawn animation. This was actually animated on ones, which basically means most of the time they go 3, which is every 3 frames. On ones means every 1 frame, or most of the time it was every 1 frame. And you can honestly tell because it's just so detailed. There's so much detail. There's parts I notice sometimes in the background that I'm like, oh my god, that guy or that minor character, and it comes throughout. It's like the Oliver Twist of anime or something. I didn't read Oliver Twist. I'm more referring to the Simpsons joke about the diorama with the 80 characters of Oliver Twist, but you get the gist, I guess. I think as complicated as this is, there's just so many characters in it, between like these weird kids who are lime green, to the government, to satire, to having government arguments, to the biker gang getting arrested, to a rival biker gang, to revolutionaries, to probably characters that I will forget in this review, and someone will say, hey, how come you didn't remember that? Or even having Tetsuo's girlfriend, who I think is named Kaori, be kind of like the Ophelia of the whole piece, which I definitely think she is. I've always felt that way. Has anyone made that connection? Probably someone, and I didn't search well enough. I think the Tetsuo Kaneda thing, why it has such a connection, is because that is relatable, but it's also what gets you through it. It's also what is almost most important to Tetsuo is Kaneda. And also, Kaneda is really fucking cool. I mean, Kaneda has one of the best entrances in film history. First off, he has an awesome bike, which is made in a special color, which is called Akira Red, which is just one of the most beautiful reds, because they had to animate this in a certain way because it's at night. Most anime and stuff took place during the day, but they had to kind of reinvent a lot of stuff and make up whole new colors for this movie. Like, I think it's like 50 new colors. I don't remember the exact number, but they came up with new colors, and that Akira Red, and I think everyone remembers that red bike and that red jacket and how cool Kaneda looks. And then he has that cool like bike slide thing that's been referenced a million times. And right when I saw that, I was like, wow, that's a cool intro. No wonder I think Kaneda is like the most coolest person in the world, especially when you're watching this when you're in middle school. You're like, holy crap, I hope I am that cool at some point. And the truth is, I was never even close. But the other truth is, he is still cooler than anyone. Like, I know he's kind of a dork in this, but I still think Kaneda is like insanely cool. Like with the pill jacket and shit. I mean, oh my god. You understand why Kaneda is so cool right then. It is narratively so smart. And he makes such an impact. I mean, obviously that slide has been referenced from here to eternity and beyond, and it will continue to be, because it's just one of the most iconic shots in all of animation and film. And that relationship between them, that Kaneda and their insecurities, and I even like when Tetsuo and Kaneda fight. Like, Tetsuo destroys like a tank. he attacks a laser from space and all this crazy stuff. But as soon as Kaneda's there, it almost feels like he holds back in a way that only friends can fight, which I really love that touch of this film. They don't have to do that. He could have just like exploded Kaneda's heart or something, you know, something crazy, or like dropped a building on him at certain points, and he doesn't. But you need that relationship, and they're the people who really witness this transformation. He really sees Tetsuo go from like his dorky friend who's playing with his bike at the beginning to becoming a gross, inflatable, like Cronenberg-y thing at the end. Kaneda's almost our awesome, cool older brother that we made up to people even though they don't exist. Audience surrogate or something. Like, we need that connection. I mean, essentially this film is like a biker gang stumbles onto one of the greatest powers of all time. That could be like a really dumb 80s movie where it's like, oh, this ridiculous biker gang suddenly has nuclear capabilities. And it's almost like the tagline, like, Neo Tokyo is about to explode, which is a feeling throughout this film. That's a great tagline, because when you watch this film, it feels very volatile. There's, you know, there's terrorist attacks and protests going on all the time. And by the way, watching this in 2017 is scary, because I remember when this felt very fictional and crazy and dystopian. Although I don't know how dystopian it feels, and that might be current events, but it also might be that I feel like dystopia is like, you know, like Mad Max or something, and this is like, oh, we're in a city and there's explosions. It's like, not, I mean, it's not like I'd want to live there, but it's just like, there should be like, we can't get water and stuff. That's dystopian. If you have a nice apartment, I don't know if that's really dystopian. The narrative is just so interesting. You get so wrapped up into it. When I'm watching Akira, I'm so sucked in. I'm so into it. I'm so invested in it. But what is there to put me there, to be honest? I mean, there's not a lot that's necessarily explainable, but it's just the way the story is told. It's the way it gets you through it. It's the way it moves. It feels like a complicated story. I've read the manga before. I haven't read it in a while, but I never felt lost in this. A lot of people say you need to read the manga, and I mean, I've never felt too lost, but I kind of like how there's all these moving parts and it feels super complicated and it feels complex and hard to, you know, exactly understand what's going on. And there's certain characters and there's this and there's all these moving parts, because as much as this film is about Tetsuo and Kaneda and the Akira stuff and all that, I think it's also about the city of Neo Tokyo. Almost like a film like The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, where it's very much about New York City, and it's not just about Walter Matthau's character, but it's about all the moving parts in the city. This is very much about Neo Tokyo as a city, and you get a sense of that city. And I know it does feel like it's taking characters that are probably much more complicated in the manga and much more fleshed out and condensing them down, but I kind of really like that about it. It's really kind of watchable, and it's really investing, and it really makes me keep thinking about the movie. That's one thing I think that really helps a movie stay with you. Is I've seen certain movies that are good, but I know like in a week I'm not going to give a shit, and unless someone brings it up or I see the poster on the subway or a TV ad, I'm not going to think about them. And Akira is like not that way, because I will just think randomly years later will think about a random character who is a silent person who I didn't really think about, or I'll think about a scene, or I'll think about a shot. It's thought-provoking in a way that's so next level, it's like undescribable how thought-provoking this film is, because it makes you think about religion, it makes you think about government, it makes you think about satire, it makes you think about nuclear power, it makes you think about Japan's art and pop culture and how that's been influenced in a post-World War II atomic age, going all the way to the original Godzilla film, to Akira, to Shin Godzilla, to Your Name, how disasters have led such a major influence on Japan's cinematic voice, and particularly through animation. It makes me think about that. I think there's many things in Akira, there's many ideas that are fleshed out, and even the cult of Akira thing I was thinking about this time. It's kind of an interesting film to review, because I almost think there is no way to do a perfect review, because there's so much in there, and it's so dense, and there's so much to think about. And even things I didn't know, like the soundtrack, which is amazing, and even more amazing, you know, they made most of the soundtrack before watching the movie, which is traditionally can lead to some interesting and oddly scored films, but it doesn't feel that way. I actually didn't know about that before, because the soundtrack is like so spot on perfect, and it leads kind of like a tribalness and extreme quality to it, and kind of emphasizes things in the ways that a great score can. I think a lot of people say a great score doesn't like point you and show you what to do, but I think in a lot of ways a great score can do that, and can put put you in this interesting way and make you rethink about things and make you think about how savage something can be, how comforting something can be, and point you in that right direction. I think this score absolutely does that. I also didn't know about the hypersonic sound theory thing that they applied to this film and had sounds in this that you can barely pick up but influences how you think about things, which I'm not sure if the DVD version I have has that or not, because I couldn't hear it. Or did I? I don't. But I found that incredibly fascinating that someone who made a film score was like, oh, we'll have this hypersonic thing and it'll be under there and stuff. And supposedly there's certain DVDs that have it and stuff. But I'm like, I mean, you could tell me it's on any DVD and every DVD. I'd believe it, but it's an interesting theory, or I don't know. It sounds so weird. I don't know. An epic kind of action-y classic. And I think I understand why this was so mind-blowing for so many people, because first off, it's incredibly violent. So if you're a 13-year-old and you want to get into anime and sci-fi and stuff that's like cool, this is the coolest, but it's also super complicated. It's also an epic, huge movie, and it can get away with a lot of things. So it's almost the perfect film to start kind of the anime boom and get people more into anime. And really at the time, it was like the big anime VHS at Blockbuster. Like they always had a couple copies. I knew so many people had different copies of this. It gets reissued on DVD and Blu-ray and VHS and Laserdisc and whatever else because it was such a huge thing. And I think because it was such an entertaining thing that you just want to sit back and go, whoa, what did they do here? You want to tell your friends, like, there's this cool biker guy and they're a biker gang, but it's really cool and it's violent and it involves this guy has special powers, and they're like, oh, okay. And then they kind of like end up jumping into a rabbit hole that's far more complicated than you're barely scratching the surface. The reason I didn't even try to do a plot is because could you really even do a plot? I've seen reviews that try to do the angry video game nerd thing and go through the plot, and it's like you're never really even going to do it justice because this film is so complicated, you know, and it's beautifully complicated in that. I've always wondered kind of how popular the manga was in Japan, and I haven't really found a distinct answer on that. It's just that Katsuhiro Otomo made this manga, and then they wanted to make a movie out of it, and the Akira committee was made, giving Katsuhiro Otomo full creative control, which I think was a good thing. And it was between all these different companies, Bandai, Toho, Laserdisc Corporation, Machi Broadcasting System. It's like a ton of companies came together to make this a reality. And I think Akira was kind of this like Gone with the Wind type of Japanese animation type of thing. It probably plays a lot different in Japan, but I think it's still like a huge classic of film and animation. And a classic that I don't think will ever go away because it's kind of like Metropolis, where Metropolis, the Fritz Lang movie, has a lot of moving parts, but when you're watching it, you're kind of just in awe of it. And I think that's kind of why, like, when I looked up Akira and looked up kind of reviews and things, a lot of it is like, this film is really great, Katsuhiro Otomo's a genius, and they are, and I'm never gonna dispute that, but I think it's almost like undescribable what this is because there's just so many moving parts. And yes, you can read the manga and watch this and try to fully understand it, but I think most people, you know, don't do that, and I don't think you should necessarily have to do that. And I think the success of this movie did not have anything to do with that crap. I mean, you can read the manga, I'm sure it's a good manga, I'm not saying there's anything bad with the manga or something. This film stands on its own because it is just unbelievable when watching it how this can work the way it does. I think a great director can make even the craziest storyline and convoluted story work and sing the way Akira does. Akira is just one of the greatest animated films and probably considered to be the greatest anime because there's only one film like it. There used to be a time in animation where you didn't have studios that were driven by auteurs and driven by making films, and you just had people making this one little movie, and it was a unique thing, and you never got another thing that was anywhere semi like it. Katsuhiro Otomo made other films, but I don't think anyone ever got to what Akira was, and the mammoth production and the mammoth shadow that Akira laid upon animation and filmmaking and the influence that will never be undone. That's kind of what's so great about this period in animation, and I don't know if we'll really get back to that because now we have studios and now we have auteurs, and that's a great thing, but Akira kind of makes me think that that other way was a great thing. It almost kind of is both the old way and the new way because it's a ton of money, it's a ton of great animation and amazing shots and memorable shots and crazy stories and everything like that, but it's also just kind of like this one mammoth production. There's only one like this, and that's what it was, and you kind of had to just watch it and deal with what it was going to do. And what it was going to do was just so watchable and drags you in such a way that, yeah, if I just broke it down and go, yeah, I don't know, this character might not work, and what was their real motivation or something. And, you know, if we had this whole thing really fleshed out, it would be a whole thing like Game of the Thrones or something like that. That is stupid. Sure, you could do a TV show or something, and that's probably, honestly, if you're ever going to adapt it, the only thing they ever should do. In terms of what this movie is it's just this one-of-a-kind, amazing masterpiece of filmmaking and animation, and that's what made it so memorable. I don't think the story entirely is, but I think that's part of it. I think all the moving parts, having this amazing soundtrack that amps you up and gets your adrenaline going and makes you scared and fearful, just feeling the intensity of it. Akira is that feeling that, whoa, animation can do this. And watching it now, I've probably watched this movie throughout more than half my life at this point, and I still watch this film and go, holy shit, animation can do this. And it's just that feeling that very rare films can do in terms of live action and an animation, of making you just sit back and just being like, wow, we've come to this point and this happened. This is just an amazing type of film. And maybe singing this praises of this film in a review is a little redundant. Maybe it doesn't need to be happened. Maybe this film doesn't need to be reviewed, to be honest, because it's such a masterpiece in itself. Once you watch it, you know how great it is, and you don't really need someone to tell you to. But I think what makes Akira so great is that just watching it, it hits you instantly. It is both intense and subtle and convoluted and a complex hell of a motion picture, and it kind of demands you take animation more seriously or just forget you in the dust while it keeps moving on and does all the crazy amazing things it does throughout this film. Akira is probably one of the best viewing experiences I will probably ever have in my lifetime, and I keep having it almost every time I see this movie. Akira probably is the best anime, and I'm safe to say that almost every time it keeps reproving to me how amazing it is. This film just gets better with age and keeps reminding me why animation should be taken seriously, and showing me how wonderful filmmaking can be with animation and storytelling. And really what makes a great film is the entire package of what it's doing, which I think Akira does probably just as well as any great movie can do. So if you've seen Akira and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And if you would like to enter a movie into the movie review vote, then click on the link below for my Patreon and pledge, and maybe I will be reviewing your movie next month. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.